Midnight, New Year's Day, 1863. Major General John B. Magruder takes the first step on the 2-mile rail bridge that connects the Texas mainland to Galveston Island. Following Prince John is a force of 1,000 men, battle-hardened veterans from Sibley's invasion of New Mexico. For the next hour, the shivering Texans slowly make their way across the trestle, using the bright moonlight to guide their every step. Yet, while they cross, they are encapsulated with fear, frightened by the thought that one single mistake will result in them falling into the watery depths down below. Finally, after 4 grueling hours, Magruder's men are in place just outside Galveston. Magruder knows he must succeed in his attack because if he doesn't, the Federals will entrench themselves on the Texas coast and use the town as a springboard for future, deeper invasions. Then, just a little after 4 a.m., with his forces ready, Magruder pulls the lanyard of a light gun, sending a shot streaking into the quiet town, announcing to the entire island that the Confederates are back. Following the inauguration of war between the North and South after the bombardment of Fort Sumter, President Abraham Lincoln declared a naval blockade of the coastline in all ports of the states in rebellion. This was in order to choke out the lucrative trade of cotton, which the southern states' economies heavily relied upon, especially for the youngest state in the Confederacy, Texas, which, during its almost 10-year adventure as an independent republic, depended on the cultivation, harvesting, and exportation of cotton. Over 90% of all exports that left the Lone Star Republic was cotton. Thus, due to this over-reliance on cotton to fuel its economy, Texas also relied heavily upon the labor of African slaves that worked the cotton plantations. By 1860, 2/3 of all trade that flowed through Texas went through a single port, the island city of Galveston. This is in part due to its extremely favorable position as one of the finest natural ports between New Orleans and Veracruz. This geographical advantage enabled the city to become a major center of sophisticated manufacturing and service industries that catered to its bustling shipping economy. The island city also had modern-day amenities, such as gas pipes for lighting and cooking, and a rail bridge connecting the city to the rail junction in Houston. To accommodate the 7,300 people that call the island home, the second largest population in the state, just behind San Antonio, Galveston boasts hotels, entertainment venues, and professions that provide day-to-day public services. Its newspaper, the Galveston News, is one of the most important papers in Texas and one of the most influential in the entire South. The editor, Willard Richardson, proudly proclaimed that in 1861, thanks to its exponential growth, Galveston leaves no room to doubt that it must ere-long rival many of the principal seaports of the South. This boomtown, which overwhelmingly voted in favor of secession on the coast of the rebellious state of Texas, attracted eyes from both the North and South as soon as the first shots were fired at Fort Sumter. For the North, especially the New England states, were in desperate need of a source of cotton for their textile mills. This desperation forced the New England politicians to agitate for an invasion of the Lone Star State, who sees Galveston as a springboard to claim the fertile cotton fields in Texas's interior. While for the Confederates, they relied upon the island city to be a safe haven for daring merchants to run the federal blockade. In February of 1861, realizing that Galveston would be the first place to be attacked by the Federal Navy, the Texas Committee of Public Safety taps 56-year-old General Sidney Sherman, of San Jacinto fame, to take over command of the island city's defenses. Though Galveston Island is a little over 27 miles long, the geography works well for the defenders. The city lies on the northeastern side of the island, facing Galveston Bay. Along with the rail bridge that connects the island to the mainland, no ships will be able to sail the city from the west. Therefore, forcing any and all attackers to approach to the eastern inlet between Galveston Island and Bolivar Peninsula. Thanks to this arrangement, Sherman is able to focus the majority of his guns against a single entrance. With expert advice from General David E. Twiggs and Captain Walter Stevens, Sherman pinpoints ideal locations facing the inlet on Bolivar Peninsula, Pelican Spit, and Galveston Island to build their shore batteries. This effective layout will enable the defenders to force any attacking ship to run through a gauntlet of fire. However, though Sherman is able to find ideal locations for battery placements, if he does not receive enough cannons to install, the Texans will not be able to thwart any naval assaults. To make matters worse, many of Sherman's men refuse to acknowledge his authority in Galveston, arguing that the committee that charged him with building up the defenses is no longer meeting. Thus, his authority no longer exists. Once the pleas from Sherman reach Austin, they send somebody who can take official command of the island, Captain John C. Moore. Along with Moore, Colonel Earl Van Dorn, newly appointed commander of all Confederate forces in Texas, moves his headquarters to the island to oversee the building of its defenses. Along with his duties of defending Texas, Van Dorn is charged by the Confederate government to prevent any departure of U.S. troops from the state. In mid-April, Van Dorn learns that a body of Federal troops are marching from San Antonio to Indianola to board ships bound for the north. After gathering a force of 125 Irish and German dock workers, Van Dorn sails from Matagorda Bay. On the night of April 17th, Van Dorn's force attacks and captures the flotilla transporting the Federal soldiers. This includes the famous ship, Star of the West, that was shot at while trying to relieve the Fort Sumter garrison back in December of 1860. This stunt makes Van Dorn an overnight sensation in the Confederacy and becomes the target of Lincoln's ire, who declares him a pirate. Incensed with the attack, Lincoln demands that Galveston be immediately blockaded. In July of 1861, war finally comes to Galveston as the first Federal ship, Captain James Alden's USS South Carolina, arrives to initiate the blockade. For the next month, the South Carolina will capture multiple small schooners and test the Confederate defenses. During one of the engagements, an errant shell misses the South Battery and kills a spectating European. Seeing that war has finally reached their doorstep, many Galvestonians, including the city's newspaper, pack up and move to Houston. In September, Van Dorn is promoted to Brigadier General and summoned to Richmond to command a division in Virginia. In his place, Davis taps Brigadier General Paul O. Hebert to take over the Department of Texas. Hebert, a West Point graduate, Mexican-American veteran, and former governor of Louisiana, immediately moves his headquarters to the crisis sector, Galveston Island. After reviewing its defenses, the general is greatly disturbed by its dilapidated condition. Writing to Richmond, Hebert says, "I find this coast in almost a defenseless state, and in the almost total want of proper works and armaments. The task of defending successfully any point against an attack of any magnitude amounts to a military impossibility." In October, Hebert calls for volunteers to come and defend the island city, declaring, "To the men of Texas, it is more than probable that your state will soon be invaded by the sea coast. Organize yourself into companies or battalions, clean off your muskets and knives, and be ready to march for the coast at a moment's notice." Yet, regardless of this proclamation, Hebert sees no solution that will enable him to successfully repulse a seaborne attack. The island is too long to defend, the batteries are inadequate to repel a naval invasion, and the volunteers are armed with obsolete guns. The feeling of insecurity only increases as 1862 dawns. Guns that have been requisitioned have not yet arrived, local foundries have failed to cast their own pieces, and the defenses still remain dilapidated. With no confidence in the Confederate government to defend the island, more Galvestonians flee for Houston, leaving the city virtually abandoned by the locals. As the island continues to be depopulated, the Confederate government begins considering moving the troops to more pressing sectors further north. In February, Secretary of War Judah P. Benjamin informs Hebert that, due to the recent disasters of Forts Henry and Donelson in Tennessee, he's required to send all troops except for his artillerists to the front. Thus, Colonel Moore, in command of the newly raised 2nd Texas Infantry, marches off to join the Western Army in Mississippi. With no infantry left to hold the town, Hebert makes contingency plans to evacuate if an attack ever comes. Sensing weakness, Captain Henry Eagle's USS Santee, which has recently relieved the USS South Carolina, sends an ultimatum to the city on May 17th. This demand is inspired by the recent capture of New Orleans on May 1st by Farragut's squadron. Looking to buy time, Colonel Joseph J. Cook, now in command after Moore's departure, answers with, "Whenever the naval and land forces of the United States shall make their appearance off Galveston, I shall answer their demand." Eagle, irritated that his bluff was called, threatens to bombard the town if they do not evacuate. This threat instills fear among the remaining inhabitants and even prompts Hebert to declare martial law in the surrounding counties. But soon the deadline passes without any action on Eagle's part. Though unsuccessful in taking the island, Eagle realizes that with a little force at hand, he could compel the Confederates to surrender. Farragut promises to visit the premier Texas city once he is finished, but until then, Eagle's theory will have to wait. By August, the threat of an invasion has dissipated completely, and many Galvestonians return to the city to continue life as they had before. As morale steadily rises among those on the island, the only person whose morale did not improve was Hebert's. Tired of raising troops only to have them be sent off to other fronts, Hebert decides to call it quits and apply for command at the front among the soldiers he had raised. Texas Governor Francis R. Lubbock, tired of dealing with the pessimist, was not sad to see him go, stating, "Hebert was somewhat bewildered by the magnitude of the task assigned him, and not have matured any definite line of policy." For almost a year, despite his outburst, Hebert successfully defended Galveston from being captured by the Federal Navy. Yet, with the general packing up and leaving, it will now be up to whoever decides to fill Hebert's shoes to defend Texas's crown jewel from an ever-encroaching federal presence. Following the capture of New Orleans in May and the failure to take Vicksburg in July, Farragut finally decides it's time to pay Galveston a visit and test Eagle's theory of applying physical pressure. In early October, Farragut dispatches a portion of his mortar flotilla under the command of 46-year-old Commander William B. Renshaw. The commander, Renshaw, comes from a well-known New York naval family and is named after Commodore William Bainbridge, an early naval hero who served extensively in the wars of the early 19th century. Following in his father's path, Renshaw joined the Navy in 1831 and would serve on various ships for the next 30 years. After the war between the states ignited, Renshaw would be promoted to commander and attached to Flag Officer David G. Farragut's squadron. During Farragut's operations on the Mississippi, Renshaw will be commended by his superior, who stated, "Commander Renshaw manages his vessel handsomely." In total, the fleet bound for Galveston consists of 5 ships, 2 ferryboats, 2 gunboats, and a mortar schooner. Among these ships is the storied USS Harriet Lane, which has seen extensive service in the war so far, such as among the Outer Banks of North Carolina and along the Mississippi. On October 4th, 1862, Renshaw's flotilla is spotted near the entrance to Galveston Bay. Working with Eagle's reconnaissance, Renshaw wants to silence Fort Point and force his way into the harbor. Luckily, once the Federals move into range, their overwhelming firepower quickly quiets the guns. Following the silencing of Fort Point, Colonel Cook realizes his position is untenable and requests a truce to evacuate the citizenry, which Renshaw grants for 4 days. The next day, Colonel Xavier B. Debray arrives to take command of the situation and orders Colonel Cook to move his forces across a rail bridge to the mainland. The Confederates take anything of military value with them and reposition their batteries at Virginia Point. Upon hearing news that the Confederates are withdrawing, the majority of Galvestonians follow suit and flee to Houston. At the end of the evacuation, the only remaining Confederates on the island are the troops manning Eagle Grove, a fort defending the rail bridge. Saddened by the loss of Galveston, island resident and attorney William P. Ballinger writes, This is a black day in our history. Galveston is in the power of the enemy. On October 8th, Renshaw's flotilla sails into the harbor and raises the United States flag at the Galveston Customs House. Despite his easy conquest of Galveston, Renshaw does not have sufficient forces to occupy the city. His marine force is so small that he can only send small detachments to raise the flag during the day and retreat to their boats at night. Renshaw's position is so insecure that he worries about a daily rebel infiltration of the city. Farragut, in light of the capture, writes to Major General Benjamin F. Butler in New Orleans to dispatch some infantry to defend Galveston. But until General Butler decides who and what to send, Renshaw will be left alone to defend his conquest. In November, the Federals under Renshaw face alarm after alarm as encounters with Confederate scouts in the town increase. Renshaw's small force is so jumpy that they would shoot at anything that looked odd. Constant encounters with scouts and growing rumors of a Confederate attack drive Renshaw to the point that he considers withdrawing from the city altogether. Farragut gets so tired of Renshaw's incessant reports that he has to order his commander to calm down, while promising that the requested infantry is on their way. Finally, after waiting for over 2 months, Renshaw finally receives the first of his infantry support on Christmas Eve. 264 men of the 42nd Massachusetts under the command of Colonel Isaac Burrell. Despite requesting at least a regiment to occupy Galveston, Renshaw initially receives only 3 companies, as only one of the 4 transports carrying the regiment arrives on time. The rest are slowly making their way to Texas, but will not arrive until after the new year. Burrell's 42nd Massachusetts represents the first elements of a planned invasion of Texas, which is being formed by Major General Nathaniel P. Banks. Following his lackluster career in Virginia, Banks is given command of the Army of the Gulf in November and is asked by Lincoln to raise troops to New England. But in early December, Banks receives secret orders from Stanton to replace Butler in New Orleans and assist Grant with reopening the Mississippi. Upon his arrival in the Crescent City, Banks receives urgent messages from Farragut to send infantry support to Galveston. Following his landing, Burrell and his 42nd get to work fortifying their position at Coons Wharf. After completing their defenses, the boys of the 42nd rummage through the abandoned houses, taking anything they deemed valuable, such as tobacco, brown sugar, molasses, and some Confederate money. While his men ransack the town, Burrell starts his preparations to assault the Confederates at Eagle Grove. Burrell believes that once the invasion of Texas begins, the Federals will be able to easily cross onto the mainland using the rail bridge. Thus, no attempt is made to destroy it, leaving it intact for the Confederates to use for the time being. But until the balance of his regiment arrives, Burrell and his Bay Staters enjoy the end of 1862 among the cozy buildings of Galveston. Following the capitulation of Galveston in early October, Richmond decided to shake up the command structure in Texas again. Taking over from Hebert's 55-year-old Virginian Major General John B. Magruder. So far in the war, Magruder has seen extensive combat in Virginia, from winning the first battle for the Confederacy at Big Bethel to expertly defending Yorktown from McClellan's massive thrust up the peninsula. Despite these spectacular achievements, they were overshadowed by his mediocre performance at the Battle of Seven Pines in 7 days' battles. Following the Peninsula Campaign, General Robert E. Lee reorganized the Army of Northern Virginia into 2 wings, leaving Magruder and a few other ineffective commanders without an assignment. However, Prince John was soon ordered to take command of the District of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Though this might be a downgrade from the prestigious front that is Virginia, Magruder's skills as an artillerist and expert defender make him the most logical choice to command that sector. Best of all, the most important quality that Magruder possesses is his ingenuity. In November, once the general arrives in Houston, he is toasted as the hero of Big Bethel, and easily wins over the hearts of the Texans, who are looking for a savior to come to the rescue. With the support of the Texans, Magruder decides to do the one thing the Federals do not expect: attack. Seeing that Galveston is a key to controlling Texas, Magruder begins planning how he will recapture the island city. But before he can do that, he'll need men. Besides the heavy artillery and partisans, Magruder has no real formation under his command. Luckily for Prince John, the traveled and battle-hardened troops of Sibley's brigade, down to 1,000 men, are currently residing in Hempstead awaiting their next assignment. These men, though victorious in every battle they fought, failed to take New Mexico for the Confederacy during Sibley's invasion of that territory earlier this year. Realizing that Sibley's brigade will be invaluable in retaking the island, Magruder bombards both Richmond and Little Rock with a request to keep the brigade in his district. Yet, despite his efforts, Magruder knows it will only be a matter of time before they are ordered elsewhere. If Magruder wants to retake Galveston with these troops, he will have to act, and act soon. Realizing that he's up against a wall with the pending reassignment of Sibley's brigade and the expected arrival of more Federals, Magruder knows he must attack soon if he wants to reclaim Galveston while he still holds the numerical advantage. After combing the state to arm his troops and rerouting Sibley's Texans to Virginia Point, Magruder gets to work planning his daring assault upon the island. Inspired by Galveston's local engineer, Professor Caleb G. Forshee, Magruder devises a two-pronged assault upon the town. One prong, which consists of roughly 1,000 men, will cross a rail bridge in the dead of night to ensure a safe advance upon the city, while the second prong, which consists of a small group of converted steamers, will descend upon Renshaw's flotilla once the land forces attack. If all goes to plan, Professor Forshee believes that it's probable that the enemy would evacuate the entire bay. The Confederate flotilla being formed in Houston will fall under the command of Major Leon Smith. The flotilla consists of 2 converted steamers and 3 support boats. Docked along Buffalo Bayou, Captain Henry Lubbock's CS Bayou City is fitted with a 32-pounder rifle, while Captain William H. Sangster's CS Neptune is armed with 2 24-pounder howitzers. To provide cover for those on board, Magruder orders the 2 ships to be padded with cotton bales. These ships are packed with so much cotton that they would come to be known as cottonclads. Unlike the guns, the most difficult matter concerning the ships is finding willing volunteers to serve aboard. After being unable to fill the required hands, Smith approaches Sibley's brigade to see who's interested. Seeing a chance to rebuild their reputation after their failed New Mexico campaign, Greene's 5th Texas Mounted Rifles and Bagby's 7th Texas Mounted Rifles volunteer for the job. Stepping aboard the 2 ships as sharpshooters, these 2 cavalry units earn an unlikely nickname as Horse Marines. Hoping to encourage his men as they prepare for their maiden voyage, Greene declares to them, "Soldiers, you are called upon to volunteer in a dangerous expedition. I have never deceived you. I will not deceive you now. I regard this as the most dangerous enterprise that men will ever engage in." As 1862 comes to a close, Magruder gathers up his land and sea forces at Virginia Point as they prepare to make their assault against Galveston. On December 31st, Major Smith moves his small flotilla down to a staging point for his assault against Galveston. Waiting for him is a message from Magruder. "I am off and will make the attack as agreed, whether you come up or not. The Rangers of the Prairie send greetings to the Rangers of the Sea." Once darkness settles over Galveston Bay, Prince John's most intricate play is set to begin when the curtains rise in 1863. Once the clock strikes midnight on January 1st, 1863, Magruder orders his infantry and artillery to cross the rail bridge. Under a bright moon, the Confederates begin their 2-mile trek over the bridge. With the mules refusing to move, the infantry are forced to lug their heavy siege guns across. Yet, despite this mishap, the crossing goes smoothly. By 1 a.m., Magruder manages to get his entire force onto the island without any issues. This is in large part due to the Marines spotting Smith's flotilla further north. With the Federals completely distracted by Smith's presence, Magruder quietly lines up his forces just west of the town. At 4 a.m., with his men all lined up and ready to go, Magruder fires the first gun to signal the attack while declaring, Now, boys, I have done my best as a private. I will go and attend to that of general. Within minutes of Magruder's signal, the entire Confederate line opens up upon the town. The 42nd Massachusetts responds the best they can, while Renshaw maneuvers his flotilla into action. Lieutenant Sidney Sherman Jr., son of General Sherman, is one of the first to fall while tending to his guns. Magruder, knowing that Coon's Wharf cannot be taken by a frontal assault, orders Cook to assault the wharf from the water. With half the men, Cook, under the cover of fire, makes a desperate attempt to storm the wharf with scaling ladders. Through a storm of lead, Cook's men near the wharf and set up their ladders. Yet, tragedy strikes as they realize their ladders are too short to reach the top. Unable to take the wharf, Cook's men pull back, leaving their dead and wounded in the shallows as they wade for cover. Unable to take the wharf by force, Magruder's men garrison themselves in the buildings and shoot down upon the Federal defenders. To counter this, Renshaw sends 3 of his ships to support the embattled infantry. Seeing the ships open fire, the rebels rush for cover, packing themselves like sardines behind the buildings. Scout Theophilus Noel, cowering among the Confederates, recalls that the shot and shell from the Federal fleet was playing havoc with the brick and stone buildings. The rebels try to respond with their light guns, but they are ineffective against the Federal gunboats. Magruder even orders up his Cotton Cloud railway gun, similar to the armored railway gun he used at Savage's Station, but it does little to suppress the gunboats. By the time daylight appears, the Federal gunboats have successfully driven back Magruder's thrust and suppressed his light artillery. Those still alive cower behind the various buildings to avoid the incessant bombardment. The cacophony is so loud that it can be heard off in Houston. Magruder, in the face of this galling fire, worries that his thrust has been nothing more than a disastrous repeat of Malvern Hill. As the aura of defeat settles over the gray ranks, many wonder where the hell is their naval support. While the Texans are taking cover in the streets of Galveston, Major Smith's flotilla rushes in to support their dispirited comrades. Yet, things already start to go awry as Bayou City's lone gun explodes after firing only 4 shots, killing Captain Veer and wounding others. As the rebel flotilla approaches, they try to ram the Harriet Lane. The Bayou City leads the charge but misses completely, while her sister Neptune does make contact, but she is seriously damaged and sinks in some nearby flats. Despite this, the Horse Marines on Neptune continue to unload their rifles upon Harriet Lane. Completely distracted by Neptune's sharpshooters, Harriet Lane loses sight of Bayou City, who makes another attempt to ram. This time, she is successful and strikes her at the wheel. The collision causes both ships to become intertwined. The Horse Marines, led by Smith himself, boards the Harriet Lane and captures it in a brief melee. With this quick victory, Captain Lovett commandeers a rowboat and, with a white flag, rows over to the other surviving ships, demanding their immediate surrender. Renshaw, who is busy trying to free the Westfield from the mud around Pelican Spit, is in no mood to entertain Lubbock's demand. Instead, he orders his fleet to abandon Galveston. Unable to free the Westfield from the mud, Renshaw orders the crew to be evacuated and the ship blown up. After removing the crew, Renshaw sets fire to the match and is leaving when the ship prematurely blows up around 8:45 a.m., killing both Renshaw and the crew of the small boat that was to carry him off. Captain Richard Law, aboard the USS Clifton, watching the explosion, assumes command of the flotilla and orders the surviving ships to immediately leave the harbor despite being under a flag of truce, leaving the same way they came 3 months before. Back at the harbor, Colonel Burrell, who just witnessed both the Westfield's explosion and the departure of the Federal flotilla, can do little more than surrender the 42nd Massachusetts, marking the end of the dramatic 5-hour Battle of Galveston. Though defeated, Burrell's defensive preparations proved effective during the fight, which resulted in him only losing 1 man killed and a few wounded. Base Stater Private George M. Fisk, watching the excitement of the victorious Texans, notes, "They were wild with joy at the result of the battle. We were the first troops which landed in their state, and they had captured us at the first attempt." Despite the incessant barrage of shot and shell from both sides, both the Federals and Confederates actually suffered light casualties. The Federals lost 46 men killed and wounded, with approximately 420 men taken prisoner, while the Confederates lost 143 men killed and wounded. However, the battle did not just end with the retaking of Galveston. Magruder's men also captured the USS Harriet Lane and huge cargoes of war material that will go a long way for the impoverished Confederates of the Trans-Mississippi. Once the final gun was fired, news spread quickly about the spectacular battle that just took place on the island. Telegraph lines beamed with excitement of Magruder's victory at Galveston, and newspapers across the country published extra editions proclaiming the glorious victory in Texas. Magruder becomes a hero of the hour and receives congratulatory messages from across the Confederacy. But the most unlikely source of praise comes from General Sam Houston, a pronounced Unionist. "General, it gives me great pleasure to mingle my congratulations with the many thousands that you have received. You, sir, have introduced a new era in Texas by driving from our soil a ruthless enemy. Your advent was scarcely known in Texas when we were awaking from our reverie to the realities of your splendid victory. Its planning and execution reflected additional glory on your former fame, as well as on the arms of Texas. The Union, especially the Navy, is mortified by the loss." Farragut, whose ships were involved in the battle, unknowingly wrote, "The disaster at Galveston has thrown us back and done more injury to the Navy than all the events of the war." Lincoln's administration was so furious at the loss that it took them only 2 weeks to start searching for a scapegoat. With Renshaw out of the picture, the blame for the defeat falls solely upon Captain Law, who, despite following orders, is charged with failing to recapture or destroy the Harriet Lane. Colonel Burrell, though forced to surrender, is praised for his expert defense of Coons Wharf and avoids being a target. Unable to accept the defeat, Farragut quickly reinitiates the blockade of Galveston. Still fuming after the loss of the Harriet Lane, Farragut sends Commodore Henry Bell with special orders to blockade Galveston and retake the lane if possible. Once back in front of Galveston, Bell made life miserable for the island defenders with his long guns. The Confederates tried to respond, but their lighter pieces could not match the range. Given the superiority in firepower, both sides are thoroughly convinced that Galveston will soon be taken again. But the arrival of an unknown ship on January 11th will decide the city's fate once and for all. On the afternoon of January 11th, Bell spots an unidentified ship off in the distance. Assuming it to be another blockade runner, he orders the USS Hatteras to intercept it. After chasing the unknown cruiser for a bit, the Hatteras runs alongside and demands its surrender. Once the two boats are lined up, the Confederates shout, "We're the CSS Alabama," and blast away at the shocked Federal seamen. The two ships trade broadsides for 13 minutes until the Hatteras signals its defeat. Damaged beyond repair, the boat starts to sink, forcing the Alabama to save the floundering Federal crew. Startled by the sudden arrival of Captain Raphael Sims' CSS Alabama, Bell decides that attacking Galveston with roving rebel ships nearby would not be ideal. Thus, due to Sims' coincidental arrival at Galveston, he thwarted any attempt by the Federals to retake the island, unknowingly sparing the city from Union occupation for the rest of the war. The loss of Galveston and the shattering of his plans to invade Texas will haunt Major General Nathaniel P. Banks years after the battle, forcing him to reconsider how he would claim Texas's white, fluffy gold. 2 years after the battle in 1865, Banks still resents the defeat, stating, "The loss of Galveston was the most unfortunate affair that occurred in the Department of the Gulf during my command."